In the message I wrote for the City Club's annual report this year, I summoned up the spirit of Athenian democracy to explain why City Club has remained a force in Portland for 75 years. The spirit of civic responsibility has moved every great culture in history. Let's remember that as finger-pointing and recrimination try to shove aside responsible and reasoned dialogue in public affairs. City Club has an overriding message for the population at large. Stop being the people and become citizens of our metropolitan area, our state, our country. The people have elected and followed the likes of Napoleon and Hitler. An informed citizenry, on the other hand, produces national leaders like Thomas Jefferson and local leaders like Vera Katz, Earl Blumenauer, and Matthew Prophet. Like every City Club president, I've discovered over the past year that City Club works because its members work and care about the community. Leadership in City Club is really just stewardship because the fundamental values and directions of the club have been and always will be the same: civic responsibility. Since there were no nominees other than those already nominated for the positions of officers and board, it's my distinct honor at this point to announce by acclamation that the nominees are elected. And Patty, obedient to you and to an outstanding Board of Governors, I pass the helm of a club that has grown in membership by 10% over the past year and has rededicated itself to cultural diversity and inclusion in all of its activities. We have no gavel, no oath of office. In true small d, small r, democratic, Republican City Club tradition, I offer you, as the mantle passes, a handshake, best wishes, and a hug.
Thanks very much, Jim. And just let me say that I am very much looking forward to this next year. At the end of this month, the leadership of the club, the Board of Governors, the Research Board, and the Standing Committee chairs are going to meet in a retreat with all of those people together, and we will be laying out our plans for the coming year. And it is our intention to share those plans here with the club at our regular Friday program on July 10th, in addition to our speaker that day. I would also like to say a thank you to some other very important people, and they are the outgoing board of members, some of whom are seated at this table here in front of us. I know Kathy Oxborough. Kathy, if you stand up, our program chair, Ross Simmons, who has served very faithfully on the Board of Governors, some of those who are unable to be with us today, Margaret Mahoney, Lloyd Anderson. Let's give them a big round of applause for all their hard work. I would also like to recognize and thank our staff, without whom we could not carry out the mission of City Club, and they are very important to all of us. They too are seated over here at a table, and I would ask them to stand. First of all, Nancy Hedin, our Executive Director, Nancy Kirkinen, our Research Director, Donna Schaefer, Communications Director, Cindy Lehman, Committee Assistant, Jenny Bremner, Executive Assistant, and Debbie McCadden, our Staff Assistant. Please give them a warm round of applause. And last but not least on my list of thank yous, I very much would like to extend great appreciation to Jim Westwood for all his dedication and leadership that he's given the club this past year. And Jim, in appreciation for all of your hard work, we do have a plaque that we would like to give to you. Says, City Club of Portland wishes to express its appreciation to James N. Westwood, Club President, 1991 to 1992. Well, on with our program. Our board host today is going to be Jim Westwood, our outgoing president, and that means he gets the privilege of asking the first question today, and the second question will be asked by Sharon Fishman, a member of the Human Services Standing Committee and responsible for bringing this program to us today as well. Following the speaker's remarks in true City Club fashion, we will open up the meeting to questions from City Club members in the audience. Those of you who don't wish to approach the microphone but would rather write your question, please write it out and hold it up, and the staff will collect it and bring it up, and we'll allow for written questions as time permits. Our speaker today is no stranger to the City Club. Dr. Matthew Prophet first addressed the club in November 1982, the year he came to Portland from Michigan to assume the office of Superintendent of Portland Public Schools. The program was entitled The State of the Schools in the Wake of Measure 3. His second appearance came 7 years later, in October of 1989, in a program called Schools Being Tested, How High Do We Score? Under his leadership, Portland Public School students have indeed tested well, and I think the fact sheet that you find at your tables today certainly attests to that. He began his career in public education in 1971, following a 20-year military career, rising to the rank of lieutenant colonel. He has received many distinguished awards, and most recently was honored as Portland's first citizen for 1992 by the Portland Board of Realtors. Dr. Prophet is retiring this year, and we are indeed fortunate to have him with us again at the City Club, not only to review some of the milestones of the past decade of education in Portland, but also to discuss some of the future challenges facing education in the United States, Oregon, and our city. Please join me in extending a warm welcome to Dr. Matthew Prophet.
Thank you very much. It's indeed an honor for me to have this final opportunity to appear before this august group, one for whom I have had nothing but high regard, high respect. You have served our community well. I treasure what you do, and please continue to do the kind of incisive, analytical assessments of the vital organs of our society. You do it quite well. I have a prepared text that I will recite to you very, very soon, but prior to doing that, I can never really enter into making the discussion or getting into these kind of many dissertations on such critical issues such as education prior to sometimes softening the water by telling a story about a young person. And I am now in my 15th year as an urban superintendent, and I suppose during that period of time, I've had the opportunity to have thousands of experiences with tens and tens of thousands of young people. And I was sitting at the table here a moment ago thinking about which story may I tell that probably best encapsulates the unlimited potential and genius of the American youngster. And I thought, well, there are many, many stories I could tell about Portland, but I'd better tell something where people can't check the legitimacy of it quite as easily, and I'll tell it in a way which hopefully preserves an interminable anonymity with regard to your potentiality for the identification of the person to whom I'm referring. So, let me tell you a story that I experienced about 11 years or so ago, which was my last year as a superintendent of Lansing, Michigan. There was a woman, and you can check this, who was teaching our gifted and talented course for second graders. And in her gifted and talented course, she had 14 students. One of the 14 students who was in her course was a student who had formally been determined by our very elaborate, effective assessment system for the determination of kids eligible for special education, that this youngster had a very serious learning disability. This youngster's parents, however, had come to me and said, Matt, our kid is not learning disabled, and we challenge you to get some kind of assessments ongoing, which in fact can reveal and uncover his unquestioned genius. So I did not ask our own special education department to test the youngster again, or our psychologists or diagnosticians. I did get, however, a psychologist from Michigan State University, from East Lansing, to come over to the home of this particular student and test this student. This student was tested by this psychologist from Michigan State University, and when he was tested, it was found that not only was this student not learning disabled, the fact of the matter is that he had an IQ of about 180. So I was invited by his parents to visit his class since he had been placed in the gifted and talented course. And his parents said, Matt, what we really want you to do so that we can really prove to you once and for all that our young lad is not only gifted in the cognitive domain, but that he has very unquestioned maturity when it comes to the affective domain as well, that he knows how to relate to people, and there is no question that he is a well-balanced and a highly educated young man. And they requested of me then that they wanted me to ignore their child when I visited the classroom. I said, I can't do that. I said, I would never, ever deliberately ignore any child. They say, would you please do it for us? We'll tell the teacher to tell all the other youngsters that when you come, you will ignore him at our request because we're testing him. I said, under those conditions, I'll do it. I entered the classroom. I went around and I visited with all the other 13 young people and said something to them and observed their work and so forth. I said nothing to this young man who was a second grader. Then after this particular class was over, because it was the last day of school, the teacher, Marlise Hart, said, boys and girls, it's now time for us to leave. This is the last day of school. Please go across the hall. We'll have an ice cream social. All 13 youngsters, except for this young lad, went across the hall. He sat where he was. I sat where I was, probably 10 feet from him, facing him. He looked at me, maybe, for 10 or 15 seconds, but for me it appeared to be an interminable period. And as he looked at me, he decided to approach me. And he came to me and he said to me, he says, so you're the superintendent, huh? I said, yes. He says, what do you do? Now this is a second-year-old, and I am not at all exaggerating the terminology that he's using or anything at all. But to the best of my recollection, the conversation went like this. He says, what do you do? And I admitted to attempting to sound to be somewhat needed as a superintendent. And I said to him, young man, I do anything and everything that's necessary to assure that you have a profitable, productive educational experience in the Lansing School District. He said, well, that sounds very impressive, but what do you really do? Then I had to scratch my head a little bit. I say, well, I testify before the Michigan legislature. I work with groups of superintendents to assure that we establish good standards. When we hire teachers, we want them not only to be very bright and very learned, but we want them to be people who love children. We try to keep your buildings warm in the winter and cool in the summer, and we buy the best books for you and research materials and things of this kind. I say we do an awful lot. We make sure that your food is healthful and that you're safe is coming to and from school. We do many things for you. He says, wow, that's impressive. If you do all of that, you unquestionably have the ability to help me with a very serious problem I'm experiencing. I said, well, what's your problem? He says, well, Mr. Superintendent, my problem is as follows. He says, I want you to know that the availability of research materials in the Verlinden Elementary Street School Library are totally inadequate to meet my research needs. I said, what do you mean by that? He says, well, I'm doing this special project on lasers. It was at that time when we were beginning to learn about lasers. He says, I've looked in Funkin, Wagnall, and in Britannica, Americana, and so forth. He says, there's nothing at all on lasers in any of these materials. He says, do you think that it would be possible before next September that you could get some materials where I can finish this project before at least I'm through with third grade next year? I said, I promise you, I promise you, I promise you, that when you return to school next September to Verlinden Elementary Street School, I will have replete in supply all of the materials and references that you need for lasers. He says, you really promise me that? I said, yes. He says, why don't you write that down? And I did. I did write a promissory note to him, and I gave it to him, and then he was about to depart to go across the hall to join the other 13 students, but before he departed, he did say to me, it's been very nice talking with you, sir. He says, I admire you very much. He says, I'm a second grader this year, and the fire marshal does not permit second graders to go on the second floor at the Verlinden Street School But however, next year as a third grader, I'll be in Rum Umpty Umpty Ump as a third grader. And if you have any further questions, please don't hesitate to call on me. That's a true story. Now, to depart from my uncontrollable proclivity to somewhat talk too much ad lib and adhocracy, I have prepared a text which I hope is best representative of the thoughts I feel are most cogently appropriate for this particular occasion. And today I want to try to do four things. I don't know if I'll have the time to get them all in, but I'm going to try. Here are the four things on my agenda. Number one, I want to share my perspective on national trends in education. Number two, I want to speak about various state reform issues. Number three, I will review some salient milestones made in Portland during the past decade. And number four, and finally, I'll discuss some future challenges facing education in Portland, the state of Oregon, and in our nation. Let me first then, therefore, start with our national trends. It has become a popular pastime in the last decade to lambaste public education. The now infamous Nation at Risk report, which declared the United States to be awash in a tide of mediocrity, was in fact the springboard in 1983 for launching other attacks on U.S. education. Mediocrity, as this report says, I say nonsense. I don't believe it, and I don't think you should believe it either. For example, did you know that more than 90% of today's adult population attended public schools, and that means that the world prominence we hold in such fields as space technology, science, medicine, electronics, worldwide communications, and even sports is due in large measure to the work and achievements of public school graduates. Number two, the United States of America produced the first astronauts to set foot on the moon, and 23 of the first 25 United States astronauts assigned to lunar missions were public school graduates. Number three, the United States public school system is one of the few major educational systems in the world that's attempting to provide a free, universal public education for all who want it. Conversely, in many other countries, education beyond the basic years of schooling is available only to selected segments of the school-age population. So you see, against a backdrop of unprecedented era of crisis, criticism, conflict, and confusion about the goals, the purposes, and the direction and the effectiveness of American public education, our public schools have, in fact, continued to do the job that they were originally meant to do. The American public school system, I believe, has long been the envy of the rest of the world, and the mission of public education is as vital today as it was on the frontier and as it has been throughout the development of this nation. And even during this past decade of what we have all assessed, I assume, as being certain debilitating debates about our effectiveness, we have, in fact, continued to remain effective despite the many reports and analyses which would indicate otherwise. I'm not asking you to take my word for it. I want to ask you to listen to a few of the facts that have come forth from a very special report that was submitted by the Sandia National Laboratory, which is located in Albuquerque, New York. Excuse me, that's not New York, is it? Let's try New Mexico. This particular Sandia Laboratory began studying Americans' education in February of 1990, and their researchers interviewed educators, legislators, business leaders, and parent groups. They conducted numerous site visits and participated in seminars and workshops in education. And I'd like to mention a few highlights of this report. Before I mention these highlights, let me make just one digression. The report actually was commissioned on the basis of Secretary of Energy Watkins having an interest in science and having an interest in environment, and knowing, of course, that science is going to play an ever-increasing role in the extent to which we can, in fact, become more effective in controlling our environment and having it become more salubrious. He felt that this particular lab would be eminently well equipped to do research in science. And so in the meantime, he said, we want you to assess the American education system, particularly in light of the basic skills and in science. The report that comes out of the Sandia Laboratory some 18 months or so later curiously indicated that American education was very different than all of the other reports that you had heard. When the Sandia Laboratory had drafted its first draft, had put together its first draft of this report, it gave a copy of this report to Secretary Watkins. Now, I understand that, and this is from several other national laboratories, that when the report was given to Secretary Watkins, he stated to the people at the Sandia Laboratories that you shall not distribute this report. And the reason you shall not distribute this report is that it flies in the face of the other reports which have been very critical of American education. And this report, even to now, has still not received wide distribution. I shall not attribute to this lack of distribution any kind of political motivations, but it is still curious, at least in my mind, as to why the publication of this report has continued to be suppressed. But let me cover some of the things that it's found. Number one, the report says that the so-called educational problems of America have in fact been very grossly exaggerated. The report says that the nation's dropout rate has in fact remained steady over the past 20 years. It states further that the high school completion rate in the United States is about 86% and that it is among the best in the world. It states that the student achievement has improved in recent years, and it also says that more American students seek post-secondary education than those in other countries, and that America leads the world in the number of students obtaining technical and non-technical degrees. It also says that 1 in 4 persons in the United States in the 25 to 29-year-old age group has completed a 4-year college degree, and they contrast that with Japan. They contrast that with the fact that 1 in 4 of the persons in America in 1930 had only completed high school. The report also says that on the subject of basic math proficiency, that gains in the basic skills by minority students are impressive, and they state that when reviewed in conjunction with the declining dropout rates, a larger majority of minority youth are staying in school and are achieving higher scores than their predecessors, and that this is a result of the education system focusing, in fact, on 2 primary issues since the mid-60s, those 2 issues being increased access as well as improved basic skills. It also says that approximately 60% of our American youth enrolled in post-secondary studies, and compare that to Japan, which generally has been one of the basic criteria that we always compare ourselves to in terms of international standards. This rate, incidentally, is about twice that of Japanese student enrollment in post-secondary education. Now let me end my comments on the national perspective by highlighting a few points concerning international comparisons. As you know, extreme forms of student tracking are common in many European countries, and unlike the United States, these countries begin specialized education or college preparatory or career education or vocational education or certificates of mastery probably as early as age 14. But what is not said is that other students in other countries take life-determining tests at a very early age, leading to a predestined position in the workforce and society. We'll talk about that later on. Most countries have massive dropout rates, with many students dropping out at the end of elementary school. China, for example, does not have as yet universal education. It hopes soon to implement universal education through the 6th grade. The Sandia report actually contains a great deal more data regarding international comparisons, but the Sandia reporters and the researchers indicated that they found, in fact, very little credible data that would allow for logical international comparisons to be made from the information available. Yet isn't it surprising how often the critics of American education continue to make these comparisons and present them to the American people as though their assessments are in fact supported by data which are reliably collected and structured for logical comparisons. Next, I've talked, I think, enough at this point about the national international scene, but I'd now like to say a few words about the school reform efforts that are underway in Oregon. Clearly, in the mind of the general public in our state, When we use the term reform in Oregon, we are referring to the Katz bill and its implementation. This statute, and I've got to take this here, I've made some little pencil notes that are microscopic. Excuse me. I made a little change here just before coming, so excuse me for looking a little close here. This statute is exciting, and it is full of possibilities, but it is not yet a plan which can be implemented with the resources that are available. Also, the plan requires a great deal more work toward developing the specific steps needed to make its general thrust feasible. My staff and our Board of Education and others in our district, however, are encouraged by the work of the Department of Education Task Force because there are task forces that are reviewing each of the major concepts within the bill, and we support the conclusions they seem to be drawing. If their work is heeded, we will, in fact, have a much more workable plan. I also, however, worry about where the leadership for education will come from in future years. The state, under Measure 5 and the new educational reform plan, will increasingly be establishing the standards and the funding that local communities must work with. If this shift takes away a local community's ability to make decisions needed for local children, and if local schools have only the flexibility of doing or not doing what is part of some state legislative mandate and funding package, it is my opinion that we will be in big, big trouble. Clearly, the legislature is not where local educational programs should be created, nor should many of the basic and critical program and delivery decisions be made at the State Department of Education. Oregonians, I believe, must be on guard during the next few years to assure that principals, teachers, educators, and local citizens remain the primary planners for what happens in our schools. For if we end up with people in charge being those in Salem, we will see the energy, the commitment, and acceptance of responsibility needed at the local schools slowly and predictably dissipate. And we simply cannot have and should not have legislative micromanagement. We cannot educate youngsters if that happens because the goals will no longer be student-focused. And I'm saying in another way is that bottom-up change from a top down simply will not work. All of this leads me to a view I particularly want you to understand. We should be raising the question, what are our schools doing to prepare children to become tomorrow's workers, to assure their future behavior is humane, caring, positive, and productive? Is our universal, free public education doing all it can and that it should do to keep up with the needs of our society, to bring our young people to a place of personal confidence and constructive participation in all of our communities? And reform, I think, should be about assuring that our responsibility to young people is met and that they are prepared to take their place in the community. I believe the Katz bill, properly reviewed, adapted, and implemented, is very definitely a step in the right direction. I would like to make some comments at this point about what I'm proud to have been a part of here in Portland. During the past 10 years, Portland Public School students have made dramatic progress in practically all areas of student achievement, particularly in the basic skills and particularly in improving the percentage of our graduates who are pursuing higher education upon graduation from high school. And this applies to all groups irrespective of their cultural identity, their race, and/or their ethnicity. Fiscal stability, provided by a new tax base in May of 1982, brought with it a district ability to focus program and attention on our most educationally disadvantaged students, and our record of success shows unprecedented levels of student achievement. The evidence of significant progress in academic performance by all of our students as measured by the Roche Unit Score or the RIT scores of the last decade is very, very clear and very conclusive. The special success of our district in serving poor and minority students is also clearly and conclusively demonstrated. I am particularly proud that the reading achievement of our largest and most educationally disadvantaged minority group, that being African-American students, showed data as follows. African-American students have improved over the last decade by 55%. and others did not suffer for that gain to be made because the district as a whole has grown by some 13%. In mathematics, our African American students have registered a 62% improvement, while the district has grown by some 20%. Our second most disadvantaged group, that being Hispanic-American students, have had a similar record of being helped to dramatic improvements in measured academic achievement, registering gains of some 46% and 55% respectively in reading and mathematics during the 1980s. Each year, increasing numbers of ninth graders are meeting vigorous high school graduation requirements by passing difficult mastery tests in reading, math, and language usage. These improvements are happening in our schools throughout all parts of the school district. Our dropout rate is among the lowest in the nation for urban school districts. And for those of you who may not care how we compare to other urban districts, let me point out to you that the dropout rate in Portland has declined to a level that is no higher than the overall average for the state of Oregon. This is occurring despite the fact that the public schools in Portland serve the largest concentration of students in the state who pose the most difficult educational challenges. It serves the largest number of students from low-income families. It serves the largest number of youngsters whose home language is other than English, and the largest variety of other languages, which we estimate now to be about 45 different languages. The academic progress of our students has been the result of our ability to initiate programs designed to meet the diverse cultural and individual needs of our student body. The Portland School District has been able to put in place what we regard as being a highly comprehensive educational delivery system. I also want to say at this point is that the Board of Education with whom I have worked has been nothing short of remarkable. I often really wonder how on earth these 7 people find the time to give so much of their energy to our school system. They work and they work and they work. They're very, very serious. They're very, very sensitive. They're very, very dedicated. I cannot say enough, by the same token, about the staff of this Portland School District. Our teachers are, in fact, outstanding. And those of you who would want to see really how our teachers work, sometimes just go past buildings long after you think teachers are at home, after the kids are gone, and you will find 9 times out of 10 teachers who are working long, long hours. Also go to school sometime long before you think teachers should be there in the mornings. You'll find teachers there long before the kids arrive. You'll find them doing all kinds of things which the public generally does not recognize, nor do I think that they appreciate. I also want to commend my central staff. And certainly during the years I've been on the central staff here in Portland, I have had all kinds of professional relationships and all kinds of friendships with the people who work in our schools. But if there is one person to whom I would credit whatever degree of success our school district has experienced, whatever degree of success may in fact be attributable to the fact that I have had the energy and the time to do things beyond managing our school system on a day-to-day basis, I would pay particular tribute to a person who I think in this community is very definitely an unsung hero. I'm referring to a person who, in all of my experience in public education and in all of my experience over the 41 years I've been in public life in the military, I know of no one person to whom I would entrust my life, the life of our kids, the management of a very complex school system, knowing all the ins and outs and the risk and the legal interpretations and all those things, that a man who is still an unsung hero in this community. I'm talking about Dr. Donald McElroy, the Executive Deputy Superintendent. I feel that this man is very definitely a great value, and I will stake my professional reputation on the fact that he has done one remarkable job. There are still some questions, though. I'd like Donald to stand. Donald, would you stand? Thank you. Thank you. Let me tell you one more story. We've got a little time. When I was a young officer some 40 years ago, second lieutenant in the military, I had a friend by the name of Captain Roy C. Merworth, and I learned a lot from that man. He was talking to us as junior officers, and he was saying to us what he thought was the best mark of a good leader. He says, young lieutenants, let me tell you something. He says, I think that the true measure of a good leader is when his organization functions as well during his absence as it does when this particular person is present in the organization. Then he said further, by that particular measure, I should be outstanding, because every time I leave, my organization gets better. And that certainly applies to what McElroy does for me. He has saved my life 1,000 times, no question about it. Here are some questions, however, I think we still need to ask ourselves. Can we assure that the potential of Portland students is developed and that they will have the intellectual tools and skills needed to participate in the community, to behave and do well as tomorrow's citizens? Can we provide our students an education while ignoring the social erosions in our city, our state, and in our total society that have taken place and are continuing to take place? Can we ask our children to have hope when they see so much injustice around them? Can a child concentrate on gaining an education who has no home to return to at night, who is painfully hungry, or who has emotionally absent parents, if parents at all? Can we expect uniform success by students who live in neighborhoods that are neglected? What our children see around them, what they feel in their community, what they know from their family experience will often control what they do and what they will become. It is clear to me that society has made schools the basic institution for meeting most of the needs of children. We have progressed from a simple 3 R's approach to providing attention to equal access to all students, regardless of race, economic status, handicap, or ability. As we have accomplished increased levels of universal access, the focus has changed to trying to provide equal outcomes. This means we are now seeking more equity in the results of education and what is learned by all children of all races and of all social classes. To gain this goal, we have expanded the 3 R's, and as the identified institution for meeting the needs of children, we are now doing the following things. We are now feeding a number of students breakfast and a number more lunch. We are regularly checking their hearing, their vision, their teeth. We instruct them on hygiene and nutrition. We carry a main burden for integrating schools and integrating neighborhoods and providing recreation. We're teaching safe driving habits. We help students learn the convincing arguments against the use of drugs, about sexual abstinence, about the dangers of sexually transmitted diseases. We counsel the upset. We encourage the listless. We search for the absent. We provide for the uninterested. We motivate the lackadaisical. And we challenge the gifted. The list goes on and on and on interminably. What I've often said is that I'm convinced that the public schools of America and here in Portland are doing every single thing that other institutions in our society have failed to do. We are expected to do it all, and with very little resources. As you know, you're going to hear me say, in the midst of what we must deal with ballot measure 5, I know I was portrayed as arrogant during the campaign when ballot measure 5 passed, and I'm guilty of that because it's true. Perhaps I was. But the fact of the matter is that I felt Measure 5 would have very, very damaging impact upon education if it were passed. And I admit that perhaps some of my anger and my frustration was based on believing that so much for which we had worked in Portland so hard to put in place to educate our youth was clearly in jeopardy. And prior to Measure 5, I simply did not see enough people fighting for our students and their many needs. Clearly today, many of the citizens of Oregon are beginning to understand and see very clearly the beginning stages of the destructive potential ballot measure 5 represents, not only to education, but to the overall social support and healthful economic infrastructure of our state. When we hear the governor tell us what will be cut in human services, and the Administrative Department of Human Resources explains about the lost services to seniors, to children, to people with disabilities, to the unemployed who need training, to the people least able to care for themselves, we know we've done something terrible to Oregon. When we hear the governor say she cannot protect our schools, that cuts in state funding for elementary and secondary schools will have to be made right along with other state programs, we know we've done something terrible to Oregon. Is this an enormous challenge for us to meet? You bet. Oregon must restructure its tax system. We cannot allow this state to become an Appalachia West. This is not an educator's problem. It is a whole community problem. In thinking about how a community knows what's going on, I want to make a brief comment on the media and education. There is, in my opinion, a real mismatch here. Education is a complex, multifunctional enterprise with numerous variables, thousands of daily interactions, and tens of thousands of flowing processes. The portion of the media that the public comes in contact with is sound bites, catchy headlines, snapshot, point-in-time items. It is disconnected. News media simply do not and perhaps cannot capture the dynamic, ongoing developments of an educational system. Further, since the news items are products of individuals, we know that the headlines and reports will bear the bias of the persons creating them. Decisions are made about what is to be reported and what is not, where to place the report, how much time or space to give to it. Is it a main feature? Is it a special feature? Or an item to be buried? Will it please the editor? Will it please the station manager, the publisher, and or the advertisers? I mentioned this particular dilemma about the mismatch between a point-in-time focused media and a dynamic, long-term focused educational enterprise, only to remind us all of the additional tasks that schools have to find ways to get accurate and adequate information to the public. We understand the need and we work at it, and we know it is more important now than ever before because so much is expected of the public schools today. This is, in fact, an unprecedented time in Oregon education. It is a time of crisis, criticism, confusion, and conflict about the goals, purposes, direction, and effectiveness of public education. I have met at some length with Jack Beerworth, Portland's new superintendent. He is, in fact, an outstanding and a very, very fine educator, and I know he will carry on the excellence of our schools for our children and for this community. He will have some very new and dynamic and creative ideas. He will bring some change. He will bring continuing improvement. I think I'm leaving a system that is better today than it was 10 years ago, but it still can improve in many, many major ways. Jack Beerworth will be the one to lead that improvement. I will support him in every conceivable way, every possible way, and I trust that all of you in this community and those who care about our children will also support him. Public education has been the common denominator that can be traced from the beginning of our national history as a unifying thread in our national society. The dream many of us as Americans continue to hold for public education should not be dimmed by its critics. For me, as I hope for you, the dream is still bright. It is still full of promise. It still holds the same hope, the same expectations for the future that it contributed to our predecessors who founded this nation and to our mentors and past leaders who molded the positive human rights changes in recent decades, and to current innovators who are trying to lead us forward today. The Rodney King Los Angeles incidents attack the fiber of that hope. But the Portlands of the nation, with the Darryl Takufus, the Alcina Boozers, the Bill Scotts, the Vern Riles, Roger Breesley's, Tom Potters, Gladys McCoys, Terry Shrunks, Charles Jordans, Norm Monroe, Gretchen Kafouris, and so many, many, many more people, the long list of people who work shoulder to shoulder, head to head, heart to heart, black, brown, white, red, yellow. These are the people. This is the community working together. This is the way to make the hope stay firm and the way to turn hope into reality. Finally, let me say, I have been blessed. I have been so fortunate. I have been so honored to have had the opportunity to serve the city of Portland, Oregon. I've had the opportunity to serve other cities, and the best decision I've ever made was to stay here. Though I'm retiring, my term does not in any way end. I will continue to serve the youth of this community in many, many volunteer capacities. I will live in Portland for the rest of my life, as far as I know now, unless my wife or family decides otherwise. And finally, let me say this, is that none of us need to be an apologist for public education. Public education, as I said, is charged with doing all those things that other institutions fail to do. And though we may not compare in all instances with all the private schools and the parochial schools, I ask you to remember one thing. We do not have the choice of selecting the students who come to us. We must accept all students, whoever they may be. The only qualification for a person who comes to public education is that that person be alive and breathing. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Proffitt. Again, in City Club fashion, we will open the program up to come to questions from the audience, and I am going to invoke an executive privilege today, which might be a little dangerous on my first day of presidency, but I'm going to extend our normal adjournment time from 1:15 to 1:30. Those of you who do have to leave, please feel free to do so quietly. And our first question goes to Jim Westwood.
Dr. Prophet, I was overjoyed to hear you state publicly that you're going to stay in Portland for the rest of your life, God willing, and I wonder if you could put that in writing. Since you are going to be around for a while, and you gave us just the briefest indication of the kinds of things that you plan to be working on, obviously someone with your vitality and with your record of public service will continue to do public service. Tell us a little bit about some of the things that you do plan to do in the coming years.
Now, only with the commitment and promise that you won't tell my wife this entire list, because she was asking me, is this retirement? She only knows part of it. The first thing I'm going to do is to work as a volunteer for Ken Lewis, Leonard Girard, and Pam Jacklin, and to be the chairman of the advisory committee for the I Have a Dream Foundation. I have been given the opportunity to accept an office space over at the St. James Lutheran Church on Park Avenue, and I will be there on occasions to help in any way that I can with that effort. Number two, I have already begun the undertaking of the developing of a scholarship program for all of our students in Portland, which I think I can complete at least by the end of the class of 1994 as they walk across the stage at Civic Stadium. Let me tell you what I'm trying to do. During the 10 years I have been here, I have personally mentored anywhere from 40 to 45 young people. Some of these youngsters I've mentored, some of them have intended to go to the Ivy League schools, others have attempted to go to certain black colleges in the southeastern part of the United States, others want to attend community colleges, others don't want to go to college at all, others simply want to get a start in life to work. What I have found is that part of our school system and part of our total system works very well for some of our students, but not for all of them. I think that much can be done in terms of bringing about a coagulation of a whole other newly identified critical mass of potential assistance that is in the Department of Education, Department of Interior, Agriculture, Commerce, Transportation, National Endowment of the Arts, National Science Foundation, that there are many opportunities that we have not yet begun to tap. I believe over the course of the next 2 years, I can, in fact, cause some better mobilization and the aggregation of those resources so that every student, my dream is this, is that every student who graduates in the mid-90s, I won't say 1994, but 1995 for sure, that when every student walks across that stage at Civic Auditorium from our 10 high schools and from Metropolitan Learning Center and from the Grant and Benson schools and so forth, that they will be able to say, someone out there cares about me, someone is helping me take my next step in life, whether that be to Yale or whether it be to a job. I think that can be done. I remember in 1982 or so, I think I can estimate that we were helping about 500 or 600 of our 3,000 graduates annually take that step. Now we're helping about 1,500. I think we can help all 3,000 of our kids do that. That's number two. Number three, I will continue to work as a member of the Oregon Progress Board under the leadership of Governor Roberts. I'm sure you've heard about that. And number four, I will be teaching at least one graduate course at the University of Portland. And number five, I will improve my golf handicap.
Those of you with questions, if you would line up behind Sharon at the microphone. Sharon Fishman has the next question.
Dr. Prophet, Sharon Fishman, City Club member and member of the Human Services Standing Committee. During the time that you've been its superintendent in Portland Public Schools, you have innovated and supported and encouraged innovations in providing services for students, support services. You've mentioned so many of the needs that students attend school with, and I wondered if you can see, well, to name a few of the things that you've done, summarize some of them. Over the past Christmas holiday, you provided school lunches for students who, I know, having worked in the schools, would go home and not eat through a good portion of every day, and so you opened the schools up for school lunch program. You courageously, I think, stood up and supported the teen health clinics in the schools and the distribution of condoms to students, which was a very controversial issue. Where do you see that trend going with the schools providing social services? I know in Washington County, the schools and the Metropolitan Family Services and Washington County Human Services have joined to provide a comprehensive and cohesive program of referral and social services at 6 different school sites. What do you see the trend in Portland Public Schools?
Well, I see the trend as one continuing to further refine an effort which has already begun. I want to pass my compliments along to the leaders in our community, to include our mayor, to include Roger Breesley, Vern Riles, Gladys McCoy, Gretchen Kafuri, people in the Chamber of Commerce, Bill Scott, and others who have put together the Portland Leaders Roundtable. The Portland Leaders Roundtable has, in fact, already begun to bring together that kind of referral process. As a matter of fact, we already ourselves in the school system have such a referral process operative currently at our Ockley Green Middle School, also at our Portsmouth Middle School in North Portland, and to a lesser extent at Selwood Middle School. I see the trend being one where, despite the fact I have said that coming to schools are all of the responsibilities which are somehow unfulfilled elsewhere, that still, unless something better can be created, that we as schools should continue to offer the resources that we have to accommodate that for all of our citizens. Already underway are plans developed by the Portland Investment and the Portland Roundtable, which brings that into being. We have 3 of our high school clusters and all the schools in it, particularly and specifically those, Roosevelt Cluster, Jefferson Cluster, and the Marshall Cluster, which have already begun that. There's a meeting coming up, I think, next week or so, where the remainder of our schools are going to start the same effort. Thank you.
Paul Milius, City Club member. In looking at the flyer that was handed out, one cannot help but be struck by the significantly higher accomplishments of the Asian American students in our system.
Yes.
And perhaps this touches also on the City Club's efforts toward diversity. What can we of the larger majority community learn from those students and families that might help our students do better on the curve?
Thank you. As you note here on this particular chart with the Asians, they are in a class by themselves. Let me tell you one little anecdotal experience that would have been true until about 2 weeks ago, but that was true at least for my first 10 years here. I suppose that during the time that I've been in Portland, I'm estimating that I received during the course of a year's time maybe 100 complaints, maybe an average of 2 complaints a week from parents and our citizens, asking us to do more or to make sure we do better for young people. One curious thing that I have found and had noted that of the entire 10 years that I had been here, the only complaint I had ever received from an Asian parent was this. One night, an Asian parent called me and told me that they had a delegation who they wanted to meet with me the next morning. I said, I'll be there. I met with them in my office, and they said to me, Dr. Prophet, there's only one thing we want you to do. I say, what's that? You must leave the libraries open at X high school longer. And we did. Now, let me tell you what I think is the difference. I don't think there's any secret to outstanding student achievement, but it requires effort. I don't care how much one does for students. I think there are certain things that only the student can do for themselves. I think also that the extent to which students are supported by their parents, whoever their parents may be, is just an indispensable element to success. And if there's one thing that I would suggest that would possibly have or probably have the greatest positive impact on the potentiality for furthering the overall advancing of all of our youngsters, I think we need a positive adult or 2 or 3 in the life of every child who has high expectations for them and who give of their time and their energy and who dedicate themselves to their kids. I think that's the secret. The secret is a strong family connection, high expectations, and work, 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 with those last 3 or 4 being the most important.
Robert Bailey, a member of the City Club. Dr. Prophet, For those of us who work in the arts, it's always very painful to see them within our educational system come first under the knife when there's any kind of budget crunch. Can you tell me why that happens and what we who understand, I know you've read as much research on the value of the arts to education as anyone else. For those of us who really care about it, what can we do to make sure that the arts are strengthened in our school system, not constantly under the knife?
Okay. I think that the arts, first of all, I agree with you. Those areas that are not directly identifiable as being in the cognitive domain are generally the most vulnerable when it comes to efforts trying to effectuate budget reductions and cost savings. That's very, very true. I think, though, that a new trend has begun in Portland, and much thanks go to the Oregon Symphony, much thanks goes to organizations such as Young Audiences, many thanks go to organizations such as the Getty Foundation, from whom we have adopted discipline-based art education. And I think, in fact, I know that we've got those programs currently operative in our district. What I think we need to do is to simply raise the level of awareness of all of our citizens that art in and of itself is not to be treated in an insular vein, that all cognition can in fact be transmitted through the arts, and that for a person to be truly educated, they need to be educated in 3 domains. That not only must they be educated in terms of cognition, not only must they have the kind of education that causes them to have the fine and gross motor skills in the psychomotor domain, but the affective domain, which certainly focuses on the arts. So my best suggestion would be that we need to have clearer understandings about the extent to which the arts not only contribute toward the appreciation of culture and beauty in the world, but they are in fact a very dynamic and usable medium through which cognition can also be gained, because people generally think of them as being different from cognition.
I suggest we need an eloquent defender such as Dr. Prophet.
Oh, thank you. Right. Yes, sir.
Kurt Wavering, member. My question has to do with business education partnerships, and certainly Portland and Oregon is ahead of the country in many ways and as an example. But could you talk about what you see as the next steps for the common interests of both business and education?
Okay. I think that the next steps are, number one, for us to continue to officially put in concrete the numerous new business education partnerships that we have. Let me give you one little anecdotal recollection that I can think of now. In 1982, there were approximately 200 companies who were providing to our students student work experiences. We now have 850 companies that are doing that. We also have operative at the Grant High School, the Institute of Math and Science, some 11 business and other industries that are working with helping to develop the Institute of Science and Math. We also have at Roosevelt a very interesting and dynamic and creative approach toward the realization of the Renaissance 2000, many features of which are contained in the Katz Bill. And we're getting all kinds of cooperation there. So what I see the next step being is to continue what we're doing, but again to more highly publicize the necessity for education being the vehicle through which businesses receive the people that make them either succeed or not. I believe our board, in fact, I know our Board of Education did in fact approve very gladly in 1986 a 5-year plan for career education that we've got, and that features very, very much the need for the growing of further alliances between business. One other thing that we've done, we do have from the Portland schools a young woman who works with, her name is Mrs. Accord, Mrs. Accord, who works with the Business Youth Exchange. She is in fact working in the office of the Chamber of Commerce, and they're along with others to strengthen that. So I think the efforts are well underway. People recognize the importance of it, and I think we're moving forward.
Yes, good afternoon. Dr. Prophet, Tim.
Donna's first name is Donna Accord. I could not think of her first name. I'm sorry, Donna. I hope she's not here. Thank you.
Tim Turner. Dr. Prophet, you may be aware of Whittle Corporation putting together what's called the Edison Project, and Biano Schmidt, the former Chancellor of Yale, has come on board as the leader of that. And they're presenting this as an innovative, a truly innovative approach to education, and by implication, they don't think the public education is doing enough to innovate. I was wondering if you would comment on that.
Okay. My first comment, as I was mentioning to the person I was talking with at the table here, and this person asked me, what do you think about an educator from Yale who has left to become a part of the Whittle operation? I said, first of all, whoever he or she is, they're going to make a lot of money. Because I know two peers of mine, both of whom are superintendents, have left their superintendencies and probably are going to double their income. That's point one. But get to more the germane essence of your question. I don't criticize any organization, be it public, private, parochial, or whatever, when an organization's attempting to help young people succeed in life. I don't think we should be critical of them. And I think we need all the help we can get, whoever wants to give that help. By the same token, I'm only fearful that it's very predictable that once these so-called creative experimental pilots are done and some research is done, probably indicating that there is a significant difference in the achievement of youngsters in setting A versus setting B. Now, what you're going to find is the same kind of thing I was alluding to when we were talking about other kinds of international comparisons. It's apples and oranges. What I hope that the public does when they begin to ask questions, because I predict that there will be insular successes as well as there are insular successes everywhere, to include public education. What I hope people will ask the question is, do you in fact have present in those schools the same set of circumstances, the same demands, the same requisites for accountability,